beyond a certain point, people are incentivized not to work as hard. It's not about tax justice, it's about tax revenue. What's up guys, I'm here with another video. On this one I want to talk about income tax, wealth tax, inequality, bunch of things like that. So Gary Stevenson, who runs the YouTube channel Gary Economics, he was on Piers Morgan recently talking about his main policy proposal, which is simply that rich people need to be taxed more and poorer people, that is middle class and working class people, need to be taxed less. And that if we did that, we would reduce inequality in society. Now, on the face of it, I think that makes sense. I think it makes sense to have a progressive taxation system. That's what I mean by that. However, that doesn't mean that you should always be taxing rich people more. It doesn't mean that at all. And the reason for that is the Laffer curve. A lot of people who aren't familiar with economic theory won't know about this. The Laffer curve is a graph which shows that there's a sweet spot for how much you can tax people beyond which the tax receipts go down. Because that's what tax really is about. A lot of the times when people talk about taxing rich people more and poor people less, they think about it from a justice point of view. What feels just to them? What feels right to them? We ought to tax rich people more and tax poor people less and redistribute the taxed income to poor people. But what the Laffer curve shows is that you get diminishing returns beyond a certain tax rate. It doesn't specify what exactly that tax rate is because that depends on the economy, the society, a whole bunch of factors. But the essential principle is that beyond a certain point, people are incentivized not to work as hard, and therefore you will not make as much money in taxes. Concrete example of this, UK personal income tax rates. This is well known by the way, if you earn between roughly £100,000 and £125,000, your effective tax rate, which means the tax rate when you actually calculate it, taking into account all the personal income thresholds, tapering, all these things, your effective tax rate is 60%. Now, above £125,000, or roughly thereabouts, it's 45%. Below £100,000, it's 40%. So just because of the way the tax rules are, you really don't want to be earning between 100 and 125K because you're paying higher taxes and your take-home pay is going to be lower than if you're earning just 100K, which is just bizarre, but it's just a consequence of the rules as they're set up right now. So what do people do? People earning 100K, they don't want to get that pay rise that takes them into 110 because they're going to be worse off. So they want to keep themselves below the 100K, or they want to make the jump to 125K. Those are the only two options that make economic sense. And we all like to do things that make economic sense. We all like to save money. We all like to get the discount if we can. We all like to save on our taxes without doing anything illegal. So why wouldn't we do this? So that's just an example of how the thresholds you set and the tax rates you set and the tax regime you implement will incentivize and drive people in different ways. So you have to be careful about implementing a taxation regime purely based on sort of an ideological viewpoint of tax justice. And that's the issue I have with his recommendation, which is that it very much feels like it's coming from a tax justice point of view, which is understandable to me given his background, but at the same time, I would expect a more nuanced take on this, which is actually, it's not about tax justice, it's about tax revenue. If the government can raise higher tax revenue and the tax receipts are larger, it can spend that money on public services. It can distribute or redistribute more of that money to people who have lower incomes. So tax revenue is really what we care about. And the Laffer curve shows beyond a certain point, you're not going to make as much tax revenue. By the way, another reason you don't make as much tax revenue if you keep increasing the rates is that really rich people just leave. We've seen that in most countries that implemented a wealth tax. So a wealth tax isn't like an income tax. It's not based on what you earn. It's based on what you own, your assets. And a wealth tax typically might say every year you pay X percentage, usually 1 or lower than 1%, of everything you own, all your assets, as tax. And again, it's about redistribution, it's about reducing inequality. But what we've seen in countries that have implemented a wealth tax, a lot of them have then gone back and reverted these because in the end, they didn't raise more tax revenue. And in recent years, we see examples of countries like Norway where a number of ultra-wealthy individuals have simply left the country to avoid having to pay this wealth tax. And the Norwegian government, as a result, have lost millions, if not hundreds of millions in tax revenue as a result of this. And so that's the issue with wealth taxes. And it's also the issue with taxing the really rich too much. And too much is obviously a very subjective term, but the key thing to note is whether your taxation regime, whether your tax rates are competitive on an international stage. Because really wealthy people can just leave and go to a lower tax regime. But you don't want them to leave. You want them to stay in your country so that you get the tax money that they're going to pay. And that means offering them a tax rate that's reasonable and a good quality of life. So we have to be careful about simply taxing the rich more. And some people say, well, not all rich people can leave. Only the ultra high net worth individuals can just leave easily. Doctors can't leave as easily. Lawyers can't leave as easily. They've got kids, they've got families here. And at that point, I feel like we're almost talking about punishing them. You know, you're rich, but you're not able to move so easily, so we can tax you more. But the thing is, even with people like that, if people find it too onerous, and especially with the cost of living that's gone up over the last few years, people will find a way to leave. Ultimately, people will find a way to leave because every individual wants to create the best life possible for themselves. So what do we do about this? Well, the main thing is to increase productivity. So productivity is essentially how much workers produce per hour. And productivity in the UK has not kept up with places like Germany and the US. The UK workers are not as productive as their peers in those countries now. And there's also been an underinvestment in technology, infrastructure. We're talking transport, we're talking housing. We haven't really allowed agglomeration effects to take place. We haven't allowed our cities to be able to grow in size and therefore bring more people in and have better transport links. All of these things limit growth. They limit growth, which in turn limits size of the economy, which in turn limits the amount taken in as taxes. A lot of times businesses have also leaned on cheap labor, 0 hours contracts. This also brings into mind unions. Back in the day, workers would collectively bargain for higher wages through unions. We don't really have those as much anymore. We only have a few unions, few large unions in, for example, the transport sector and places like that. Energy being expensive, especially due to the Ukraine war, is a reason that things in general are more expensive. When the price of energy goes up, the price of everything goes up. When the price of real estate goes up, i.e. the cost of accommodation, the cost of business real estate, again, the price of everything goes up. Why? Because your rents have gone up. So these are the things that if we were to tackle would massively help reduce inequality because we would be able to employ more people, we would be able to start more businesses. And yes, HMRC would be taking more money in as taxes without having to increase the tax rates. So I'm not a proponent of simply raising taxes to fix all these things. No, I think we need to think about how we can grow the economy, how we can get investment into the economy, how we can improve and increase the productivity of British workers and increase their wages. And in doing so, we will reduce inequality and we will increase the tax receipts.